of all the things you could focus
Mhm.
on, why is passwordless authentication a meaningful product?
In my opinion, passwords are already quite obsolete. So, um, about like there's so many breaches these days. Like recently there's the Facebook hack, and there's hack recently that demanded ransom in Bitcoin. um, so, um, so basically, it's a huge problem because a lot of people reuse their passwords. So about 59% of all recorded users reuse their password across different services. And sometimes I find myself to to reuse some passwords too for like one-off services. And imagine what happens when hackers crack these companies, expose the encrypted passwords, and sort of figure out the username to password hashes, right? And kind of reuse that um, to log in and impersonate as users. So right now, I think for people with like simpler passwords, um, if you go to haveibeenpwned.com, type in your email, you're going to see all the services that have been compromised and has leaked out your information.
Isn't the solution to this to store all my passwords in the Chrome password manager?
Well, that's sort of I would say the problem is all the passwords are it's not about where you store it. It's more about what password you're using, right? So let's say if you use the same password, another let's say in app A and then app B, another a hacker can just take the same password and log in as you using the same password, even if your password is being secured in a Chrome browser.
All right. So shouldn't my best practice be to generate entirely new passwords for
hmm
every account using Google and
hmm
store it in Google?
Yeah, yeah. So right now, I think that's as close as to the mainstream solution. In this case, it's like, um, basically, it's like, oh, hey, like by the way, as an end user, you are responsible for your own security hygiene. When companies can just prevent this issue from scratch, right? From happening in the first place by not offering password-based authentication. So because in this case the companies are still storing these passwords, so yeah, like a lot of users, more security sensitive users will generate password, but a majority of internet users do not do that and do not want to deal with extra tooling around security. The most ideal way to enforce security is for security to be invisible to the user, instead of a user have to like do like a nuclear launch code every time they access an application, right? So what we do here is sort of leveling up the base bar for security by not even letting use like deferring the responsibility to the users, but giving developers the tools to build passwordless in the first place, right? So that users will not have to do that.
Give me the quick description of why I am doing this. What's the actual use case? Like, have I
hmm
lost my password? Is that what's going on here? Is
Uh-huh.
it my first time logging in? What exactly are you talking about? What are you solving? And then how is that actually implemented on the back
Gotcha.
end?
Gotcha. So let's go now versus magic, right? So now what a lot of companies provide is email-based login with passwords.
Yeah.
And
Forgot your
there's
password,
a forgot your
send you an
password.
email. I click the email. I maybe get an SMS code also to do two
Right.
factor. I put the SMS thing in, and then I can reset my password.
hmm Yeah, so that's sort of the flow these days, right? But in the end, the security really lies on your email already with forget your password, right? Assuming there's no two-factor that's added. So basically, the whole security of your system is reliant on that email recovery anyway. So why ask for the redundant password field and offer two different flows for users to sign up, right? So basically, we're like,
So
okay,
you see, you're inherent in the
mhm,
status quo is
mhm,
that your email,
mhm,
subject to two-factor authentication,
mhm,
your email is a point
mhm.
along the critical path here.
Right. So everything's dependent on the email. Even if after you type in your password to log in, you still have to verify your email in many cases. So there's just way too many steps to even get started, right, with an application.
So what you're saying is you could imagine a world where you log in without password.
Mm-hmm.
You could even still do the SMS gateway.
Yep.
But you just don't require this norm
Mm-hmm.
of entering a password.
Yes.
And you basically say, okay, if you've verified that you have the rights to this email address and you may or may not have verified your SMS, we can log you in and then we can cookie you or whatever and know that you are safe. You can log in from this device whenever you want and you're not going to have to go through this again.
Yeah. So, we don't provide that feature now, but because we're based on public-private key pairs, as long as you have your key, you'll be able to log in even without email or SMS, right? Or it could be really easy for us to provide some kind of a guest mode where you can just get started without sign up on your device, and then eventually add permanence with your email and other sort of identifiers.
Okay, this is brilliant.
Yeah, so yeah, like we're basically working on what people would be able to imagine now. But
I mean, you have convinced me that there is a significant point of friction in almost every product I use.
Yes, unnecessary friction. That's not even good for security at all.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's arguably bad for security.
Right.
It's actively bad for security.
Yes, and collectively, I think what the password industry feels like have been doing is, hey, user, it's your responsibility. It's not our responsibility.
Yes.
It's kind of like, yeah, taxes are hard to do. Let's make it hard so we can let's keep it hard.
But arguably that's the right posture, right? Because if you are seeding everything over to the email, which you point out, we're doing that whether we like it or not.
Right.
But philosophically, we may be doing the wrong thing by seeding, like at least the idea of the password represents that I'm in control. Actually Google is in control because Google has your email. Google controls your email. If you get taken off of Google, you might as well not exist.
Right.
You're saying it's time for us to admit that. If we want to do something about that side of things, we can do something about that side of things. That's not in your scope. We need to admit that. We need to admit that the email provider has control over your identity. And then I guess one thing you're kind of implying is that if you can create that acknowledgement that the email is the critical path of identity, you can make it clearer that, first of all, this is too much power to be in a centralized entity. And second of all, there can be a refactoring or a reframing of how we do identity. Yeah. And it may not actually have to be that painful.
Yes. It'll be a really smooth transition because the goal is to get users on key-based authentication. As long as the user is on the key-based authentication, you're sort of separate from these centralized providers already because all you need is the key, right, to authenticate. In fact, it's actually very similar to username and passwords, right? As you know, PKI, public key infrastructure, is public and private keys, right? You keep the private key secure, and the public key is sort of your username kind of thing. So it's the same as username password, except it's better. It's generated by computers, but username and password is generated by the user, right? Which is really prone to user errors and making like bad passwords. So the password is essentially an antiquated version of a private key, right? And the username is sort of your public identifier. So we're just doing the same thing, but with a different format that's more improved in terms of security. And we abstract away all the complexity using familiar authentication methods like email and magic link. But the goal eventually, like the dream is, one-click login from a push notification on your device. The challenge there would be sort of solving how do you recover like a lost device, right? So that's where it gets more fun.